Welcome to Hardtech People, the podcast about people operations strategy for hardtech startups. I'm Danielle Applestone, and in each episode, we dig into leadership questions, team dynamics, and operational choices that can make or break the company from the people side. Before we dive into this episode, a little context on who we are. My background is in building and scaling companies, from founding and leading teams to advising startups and helping them out with their people operations. I created this podcast to share some practical insights about some of the people stuff that hard tech founders are going through. And today I'm joined by Katie Sharp. Katie Sharp's path took her from genetics PhD to Activate.org, where she helped support deep tech entrepreneurs, and now to being a fractional chief of staff supporting all kinds of different startups. She's worked with founders at that critical moment where operations become overwhelming, and she often advises on the first key operations hire for those startups.
Yeah, it's great to be with you.
Excellent. Today, we are asking who should be your first operations hire.
One of the things I noticed with so many Activate fellows is that, especially, it depends on the type of founder, but I mostly work with really technical founders who maybe have never actually had a job at a company. They were in academia, they were doing their PhD, or maybe they were at a company, but they had a very technical role. And now they're like leading a company. And sometimes they don't even know these roles are a possibility. And I think they often wait too late to hire them. And then once they finally do, are like, oh, wow, I should have done that sooner. So I think it's a good topic to help people explore.
I'm wondering, how do you know when you need that operations hire? What are the signals?
It's hard on some level for it to be too early. One of the founders I'm working with right now, actually, he's still like a company of one. And so I'm helping him set up all of his basic systems and do things he frankly doesn't want to do, which is fine because I don't mind doing them. So It's hard, I think, to be too early. And we'll talk later about sort of the benefits of fractional for that really early stage company. But I think whenever you just have too many things going on, things are kind of slipping, or you don't really have time to do the work that you should be doing because you're overwhelmed by the tasks that have to get done. Like, you have to run payroll, you have to pay your invoices, right? And so then the work you should be doing as the CEO, as the company leader, that's more strategic, more planning, talking to customers, you don't have time for because you're overwhelmed by the stuff that just can't slip.
Yeah, sounds like that decision point could be when the very important stuff that only you can do starts to slip because you're doing more admin or operations tasks,
Totally.
Things that don't necessarily require your expertise.
Mm-hmm.
When that's taking up your time, sounds like that's a good moment to ask yourself this question.
Yeah, I think the other thing to ask yourself too is, am I spending a lot of time doing something that I'm frankly not good at and therefore am not doing well, and spending a lot more time on it than someone would spend if it was something that they were good at or that they did enjoy? And so you're making a meal out of fairly snack-sized tasks because for you they're just really hard or really unpleasant. And so they just are taking up all of your mental energy, even if frankly they're not actually, you know what I mean? Like, they don't need to be so big, but for you they're really big.
Yeah, I think one of the classic examples of that I see on the people operations side is people trying to draft their own compliant policies, for whatever state they're in, and it's just so much faster to bring in somebody who knows how to do it. It's a thing that the CEO is completely capable of doing if they put in enough time.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a good example. Like, doing things that you're not necessarily good at, and you're doing them slower than someone who is more experienced in ops.
Yeah, and I think one of the mistakes I've seen a lot of founders make when I was at Activate is there's also this weird component where they feel guilty for hiring this stuff, because I think they sometimes feel guilty for hiring someone to do something that they find unpleasant. And it's this mistake of thinking that everyone enjoys the same things, or that if you don't like a task, that no one can like the task, right? And that's just not true, right? We're all super different and we all enjoy very different kinds of work and kinds of tasks and get satisfaction for different reasons from different sources.
Mm-hmm.
But I have had a number of founders, they kind of feel bad being like, I'm just going to write a job description of all the stuff I don't like. Like, isn't that mean to the person I'm hiring?
Mm-hmm.
And having to explain, like, it's actually not. Like,
Yeah.
it's not. You can find someone who's going to actually probably like that job. And I know that's hard to wrap your head around because you're trying to offload things you don't like, but it doesn't make it untrue. So
Completely. I have a very specific story about this. It relates to the first time that I brought in an EA. I had never worked with an executive assistant before. And when someone acquired my company, that the man who acquired the company was like, "Oh, you definitely need an EA." And it was just like you said, write down everything that you don't like doing. And I struggled so hard because she was and is extremely high capacity person. She enjoys that kind of work. And at one point she walked up to me and she said, "I feel like you're not giving me enough to do, and I also saw you washing out a garbage can this morning." She's like, "I need you to tell me exactly what you want." And she's like, what's in the way? And I was like, "I just think you're incredible. You're just so capable of everything." And she's like, "I know, but it's my job to do those things." And so she gave me a Post-it note and she said, "Write down the three things that you want me to do today, no matter how, dirty a job they are." And so I wrote them down and I passed it to her. And that was how we got started. She's like, "I can just give you a Post-it note every day. You write down the topics. You don't even have to say it out loud." It was extremely helpful. And it did cut down on the time that I was spending doing things that I just didn't need to be doing.
yeah, and I think it's hard because I think there's a lot of leaders who want to be the type of leader where they're like, no job is too small. I don't say that's not my job. Like the CEO of the company my husband works for, my husband will see him like washing up a mug or cleaning up a stain in the break room, and my husband's like, "Is that really your job?" And the guy's like, "Well, it's my company. I take pride in it. If there's something that's spilled, I'll just wipe it up." And I think that that's like a good attitude to have, but you can take it too far, right? Where you're like, but also you can accept help and also you can delegate. And I
Yeah.
think one thing that I've really observed is like people who often like these types of roles, these ops types of roles, are people who get joy out of being helpful. I definitely put myself in that camp. Like makes me really happy if I feel like I was helpful today. And so you might be like, "Oh, I feel bad asking Katie to do this. Like she has this PhD, she's a smart woman. Does she really need to be like organizing these files for me?" And I'm like, "Oh, but I'm really good at organizing files, and then things will be tidy, and I know I was helpful, and oh, I just feel so pleased. I just feel so pleased," right? And so it's not like I want organizing files to be the sole thing I'm spending my time on, but it's fine, right? Because due to my nature, there's a weird joy in that for me.
Well, let's talk about a little bit more about the chief of staff role in specific, because you mentioned
Totally.
one of your clients is a company of one person.
Yeah.
And I hadn't even been thinking about a one person company bringing on an operations hire, and you do this work fractionally.
Yeah.
But let's just start talking about the different operations hire. And I'm really curious how you see the chief of staff role fitting into this.
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of I've grown to think of it on a spectrum, sort of from an executive assistant on one end, a chief of staff sort of in the middle, and then there's a variety of other titles that would be on the other side that kind of vary in how much responsibility they have and what their scope is. So it could be head of operations, it could be an office manager, it could be a biz ops manager, it kind of varies. And so, an executive assistant, I think, is really focused on trying to make the person they're supporting, the founder, the C-level person, the executive, whoever it is, be more effective. So taking things off their plate and getting them personally organized and really helping that person to be the most effective version of themselves that they could be. And that could mean a lot of different things. It doesn't mean they don't have like independent projects or work, but that's really their focus, is making that person be as effective as possible. And they might be, as you mentioned, they might be a very high capacity, you want a high capacity, smart person for this role, right? It's not a throwaway role. You want a really good person, but they're probably not going to stand in for you in a meeting. They're going to have maybe some, but less like sort of independent projects. They might be a little bit of like a sounding board for you, but probably less of that. And then as you move towards a chief of staff, they might be doing some work that's kind of trying to help you as a founder be more effective, but they might stand in for you a meeting. They probably are a strategic thought partner and a sounding board and are helping you really think through a lot of those problems more. So it's a little bit more of maybe like the mental load or that strategic partner, especially for a founder who maybe doesn't have a co-founder and is lacking that a little bit.
I'm wondering, you mentioned specifically making the founder more effective on the EA end of things. What are examples of the kinds of tasks that an EA would take on to make them more effective?
Totally. Yeah, so like helping them organize their inbox so they don't miss emails, they can respond to things quickly. It just helps them appear to external stakeholders like very efficient, very responsive, right? Where things don't drop. Again, managing their calendar, so you're taking that bandwidth of managing your calendar, managing your inbox off of your plate so you have more time for other things. If a conflict arises, if scheduling needs to get done, all those things, they kind of happen like magic in the background of your life. I mean, that has to be a lot of communication. It's not magic, it's communication to make it happen. But especially as they get to know you well, can help surface things from your inbox and keep an eye on your schedule and help you see conflicts. Hey, you told me you wanted to do this thing, but you have this other thing on your calendar. Do you really have time for that? Asking those kinds of questions. I don't know if you have other thoughts, but I think of that. And like maybe also helping you manage your to-do list and set priorities, and to the extent you're willing to, calling you out when it's like, hey, it seems like you said you were going to get XYZ done today. It doesn't seem like that got done. What happened to derail you today? And right, could I help with that, or was it just, well, you kind of procrastinated? But that accountability can be really helpful.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Even things like booking your travel or
Totally.
handling tasks where you can give the person a directive and they can execute on it with very little input, I think is key.
Yeah.
I'm wondering about, let's take it to the other far end. So as a chief of staff, what is the level of complexity of a project that you might do? Like you mentioned an independent project. What's an example of one that you think is pretty representative?
Yeah. I think one that was interesting at one point while I was at Activate hired a chief of staff. And one of the projects she took on was, we were in the middle of a strategic planning initiative for like a new 5-year strategic plan. And she project managed that whole thing. And so starting with working with the executives to lay down the framework, but also scheduling, but also running all of the meetings with all the sub teams to get their ideas and running all those brainstorming sessions, and then bringing all of that gathered information back to the executives, who of course had the final say in determining what the strategic plan was. But she project managed that whole thing and figured out helped them figure out what the process should be, and then executed the entire process. And so of course, like, the executives were then freed of all that labor of managing the process. Their unique ability to contribute was that they are the leaders of this organization and they should be making the final decisions and contributing the framework, but they weren't doing any of the logistics.
Yeah, I can see that if a huge portion of your job was something like strategic planning and you were doing that over and over and over, you might want to hire a dedicated project manager or something for that category of work. But I like the designation of a chief of staff that can do that kind of work and stand in for short-term needs. They can cover something that is just for a specific period of time, but it's not something that you would want to hire a full-time person for. However, you need to be able to trust that person is really going to be executing well.
I think those things continue to come up, right? So you could also imagine your team is, you're maybe having some communication silos and you're trying to get to the bottom of why that is, and the chief of staff can go around and talk to individual people and gather a lot of information about what's going wrong. And then as a result, perhaps you're trying to implement some like project management workflows, and they might be able to sort of source what are different what are different strategies we could use for project management that would help us communicate better? Is it as simple as just like, let's put it all on a Word doc, but like someone's managing it and keeping up with people? Or are we implementing a tool like Asana or Trello or Jira or one of the many project management tools that are out there? But I think those are the types of projects where it's something that requires probably a lot of people wrangling, a lot of organization, some project management skills, and there's just a high level of trust that you want to trust that this is like a very competent, very proactive person that you can kind of offload this to you, and you trust also that they're going to come back to you for input when it's needed, right? They're going to have a good, it develops over time, but they have good judgment about when they can make their own decisions versus when they need input from someone else because they're not the final decision maker.
Yeah, that's also key. Having a chief of staff who isn't pinging you every 5 seconds about the thing that you ask them to do, I think is really important for liberating your bandwidth.
Yeah.
One other category that I have seen be really effective with chief of staff is when fundraising. So people have had the chief of staff do all kinds of things, like coordinate all of the outbound communications with prospective investors, existing investors, gathering things for diligence, doing some market analysis on things for open questions around the fundraise.
But so much of fundraising is just managing your inbox and keeping up with communications and following up with people promptly. And a lot of that, you can get a lot of help with that.
Completely. Yeah. Well, let's shift gears a little bit. Let's keep moving along the continuum here of ops roles. Yeah, I'd love to hear about kind of office manager or head of business operations or business operations manager, kind of differentiate those two from each other, and also how are they different from EA or chief of staff?
Yeah, I think in those cases, one fundamental difference is I think in those cases, you would not expect those people to be helping you manage your inbox or getting you personally organized. They might open up your bandwidth because they're taking things off of your plate, but they're not there to specifically help you be more organized and effective. They're there to take a set of responsibilities and do those things.
Yeah, I have seen office manager have responsibilities in terms of recording expenses and following up with accountants and being a liaison to bookkeeping, but not necessarily be overlooking finances. That would be more of a biz ops manager, head of ops.
Yeah, absolutely.
And similarly, in the HR realm, I have seen office managers who will process payroll, but it's a pushing of a button. It's sort of like collecting of time cards, pushing of a button, but there's still a person that needs to provide some oversight there.
Yeah.
Hopefully. But things like company onboarding, whenever you hire someone new, bringing them up to speed on how the company works, that's definitely office manager. Even creating the materials for that onboarding, and then all of the supply purchasing, vendor relationships, basic IT, that kind of thing.
Yeah, purchasing for sure is a big one that goes into any sort of facilities manager, office manager, biz ops manager, that kind of stuff. Taking that off of your other staff and making sure that it's organized can be a game changer for your team.
Yeah. How would you advise someone to make a decision between whether or not they need a office manager for their company or a head of business operations or something like that?
Yeah, I think it depends a little bit on who else you have on your team and what those people are willing to take on, especially for like a hard tech company where you have a lab sort of situation. You could also hire a lab manager and they might have experience with safety and compliance and keeping everyone, safe and working well in the lab. But an office manager, not like a lab manager, I would often suspect would not have that experience necessarily. They might. But I think it's like, how much do you want people to take on? How much expertise and capacity you have on the rest of your team?
Yeah, I think that one of the considerations for Hardtech is that if you have a head of operations or business operations, you do need to have some experience with, if it's not a wet lab, an engineering lab where there's going to be equipment that is going to need maintenance and that you're going to have to catalog and things like that. Where if you were a head of operations and there's perhaps no physical space, it's a remote company, that's a very different skill set. But most of the time I see companies bringing on an office manager around about the 8th hire is kind of like it could be office manager with a little bit of EA flavor in there.
Yeah.
And then once they're around 20-ish people, they need someone who's really in operations. Sometimes it's head of operations or director of operations at that point.
Yeah.
What I don't see as much is people utilizing the fractional chief of staff before all that, which I think is a bit of a hack, which maybe we should define. What does fractional mean to you?
When I left Activate, I was thinking about more of like a full-time role with a single company. But one of the things that I found, and this is always, we are living our lives in a certain space and time, and we're in a current space and time where a lot of the companies that I like and admire and would like to work for are in sort of the climate tech space, and it's a tight fundraising environment. It's tight on the government grant side. It's tight on the VC side. Like, there's kind of no safe harbor right now. And so people are just feeling very understandably conservative about their spending and bringing on a full-time permanent hire. I also alluded to, like, one of the people I'm working with is a company of one. So that's on the early side, but another one, a company that I'm working for, is a company of 2 people. Some of my interest is in helping people at the earliest stages of their company development, when it frankly doesn't make sense to even have me on full time. Like, they don't really have that much work for me to do. Not only can they not afford it, but it doesn't even really make sense.
Well, let's talk about the final topic I wanted to cover, which is you've decided to bring on an ops hire.
Yeah.
Regardless of which one it is. I'm wondering how you set that person up to succeed. Like, you want to make the most out of having that hire, get as much of your bandwidth back as possible, liberate your team's time. What do you think is the MVP for how to help that person succeed?
I think one thing that's really important is to just be really honest about what you're struggling with and let go of any embarrassment you might have that things are a mess, right? Like, you've hired this person. They should be a person who likes making things be more organized, who likes things run better. If they don't understand or aren't allowed to see the full scope of what's going on, they can't help. They can't do what you brought them to do. It's like what you were saying, where you had an executive assistant for the first time, and she's seeing you do tasks that you should not be doing. She's like, that should be my job. And so she's having to come to you and say, okay, you're just going to write it on a Post-it. I'm just going to do it. We're going to ease you into this situation. So I think that's one of the first things, is to just be very open about what you're struggling with. And hopefully even during the hiring process, like, letting people understand, like, what you really need help with, so they can make a judgment call, an accurate judgment call about whether this is going to be a good fit for them.
Yeah.
So I think that's a big one.
Yeah. Knowing that they've seen this before, like, your mess is probably not going to be the worst they've ever seen.
Even if it is, honestly, if you've hired the right person, that should make them excited. They're going to be like, oh man, this is such a mess. I'm going to have so much fun fixing this. This is going to be great. This is going to be amazing. If I get in there and I'm like, oh, you basically were already organized, that's not that much for me to do. It's like kind of disappointing.
Yeah, totally.
You know? So I think there's that. There's the basic sort of things I would recommend for any hire, which is, like, have an honest conversation about what are your working styles? What do you expect responsiveness to be? You know, are we primarily communicating via email, text, Slack? If it's a fractional person, they're coming in part-time, how are they getting access to files? Are you granting access to their external email? Are you making them a company email? Like, actually just having a conversation about those things. And again, if you're hiring an ops person, hopefully they're coming in with that mindset where they will guide you to do those things. But I think that's good with any hire. And then just I think in the first few weeks, just working iteratively. And if you're upset about something, just being honest about it. I thought that you might do X. It seems like that hasn't happened. Can you help me understand from your side of the table what's going on? And I mean, those are things you'd want to do with any hire. I think particularly in this case, especially if it's like an EA and this is someone who's really going to be like up in your personal business, like it's kind of a big thing to like let someone in your inbox, right? Like they're seeing all your business. So the trust has to be there. And so it becomes even more important to make sure that you're having like regular low stakes feedback discussions and you're not letting it build up to like a high stakes discussion.
Oh, completely. Yeah. I think about it in terms of 3 categories. How do you like to connect? How do you like to communicate? How do you have conflict? What are you like in conflict? Yeah. So just so I know the landscape, and definitely sharing that with people who join my team is important. Not everybody has the same kind of operating system, so let people know what yours is.
Yeah. I think the other thing I would say for helping this person be effective is like being open to their idea. You hired them because things aren't working. And so being open to their idea that things need to change. So I think we all, as people, resist that a little bit. And so I think trying very consciously going into it, trying to be open that systems are going to look different and that you need to adapt as well, because that's what you asked for. But sometimes when you ask for something, then you get it. And then,
yeah.
Not that you regret it, but you just like weren't quite prepared for how you were going to feel about it. So
yeah. I think doing that self-preparation of things are going to change. It'll be for the better. And you hired this person to do a job, so let them do it. Yeah. I think that's great advice.
Yeah.
Excellent.
But especially in this case, because they might be asking you to change some of your personal habits, and there might be a reason for that. And so it gets more than some other hires at your company. I think it gets into some of those interpersonal dynamics that can get really sticky. So again, you just have to really be open to having like open conversations and being flexible and sharing. If you're like, I hear what you're saying, but that's just not going to work for me. I think that's also okay to say. And then hopefully this person can adapt and say, okay, if that's not going to work, let's try this other way. So.
That's great. Well, Katie, thanks so much for sharing all you know about this topic. I wasn't sure how it would go, but I'm so appreciative of all the places that we took the conversation.
Well, good. Yeah, it was great to talk to you today. And yeah, I think working with so many early stage founders, this was a topic that became of great interest to me. So happy to share what I've learned along the way.
Awesome. All right. If you are a Hardtech founder, remember, your first operations hire isn't just about fulfilling a role. It's about getting more leverage for you and for your team and liberating your bandwidth to do the things that only you can do. So before we wrap up, if you're working through people operations challenges or hiring challenges at your startup, I'd love to help. I work as a fractional VP of people and have a hiring service. So you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can also reach out to Katie. So Katie is a fractional chief of staff for startups. She would love to talk with you as well. So find us both on LinkedIn. And thanks for joining us for Hardtech People. If you enjoyed the episode, of course, subscribe, share with co-founders or friends that you think might be interested. And if you have a question about anything related to people operations strategy or hiring, send it my way. I'm planning on answering those questions in future episodes. Thanks so much.